The radio crackled with static at 3:47 hours, 37 miles northeast of Kandahar. What came through shouldn't have been possible. Lieutenant Commander Jake "Wrench" Morrison pressed his earpiece deeper, certain he'd misheard the transmission from the surrounded SEAL team. "Say again, Bravo 6. Did you just report a missing aircraft drawing symbols in the sky?" The voice that responded was tight with disbelief. "That's affirmative, Overlord. Single F-18 Super Hornet, call sign unknown, just executed a perfect infinity loop directly above our position. Hostile fire has completely ceased. They're just watching it." Morrison exchanged glances with his intelligence officer. In 15 years of combat operations, neither had encountered anything like this. The missing jet belonged to Squadron VFA 131, reported shot down over the Hindu Kush 3 days prior. The pilot was presumed KIA. Yet here was an active aircraft, apparently conducting aerial acrobatics over a Taliban stronghold, while 12 Navy SEALs remained pinned in a dried riverbed, ammunition running critically low. "Bravo 6, can you identify the pilot?" Morrison's voice carried across the command center, drawing every operator's attention. "Negative visual on pilot, but—" The SEAL's transmission paused. When he returned, something had changed in his tone. "Sir, that infinity symbol just shifted into something else. Looks like— Christ, it looks like an anchor." The anchor, every sailor knew its significance. Hope, steadfastness, the eternal bond between those who served and those who waited. But this wasn't Navy regulation flying. This was something else entirely. Major Alina Klov had been flying for 11 hours straight when her fuel gauges hit critical. The landscape below stretched endlessly brown and hostile, punctuated only by the jagged scars of ancient riverbeds and the occasional glint of metal where war had left its mark. Her F-18's engines hummed with mechanical precision, but beneath that steady rhythm, something else pulled at her consciousness, a frequency she couldn't quite tune out. She'd been dead for 3 days, according to official records, shot down during a reconnaissance mission that went sideways when surface-to-air missiles lit up the sky like deadly fireworks. Her wingman had watched her jet disappear behind a ridge, followed by the telltale bloom of orange flame that meant another pilot wasn't coming home. They'd already notified her sister in Portland. The flag was probably folded and ready. But Alina Klov had survived worse than gravity and Taliban rockets. She'd survived the whispers that followed her through flight school, the pointed questions about whether women belonged in combat aircraft, the casual dismissals disguised as concern for her safety. She'd survived the night her father never came home from his own war, leaving behind only a bronze star and the echo of rotors that still haunted her dreams. Now, circling above what appeared to be a firefight, she made a decision that would ripple through military legend for decades. Her jet carved through the morning air with deliberate precision, leaving contrails that spelled out messages only other warriors could truly understand. Below, both friend and foe stopped shooting to witness something that shouldn't exist, a ghost pilot riding hope across the sky in vapor and defiance. The Taliban fighters had never seen anything like it. Guns lowered as heads tilted skyward, following the impossible dance of an aircraft that moved like it was painting poetry with jet exhaust. Their commander, a weathered veteran of countless battles, recognized something ancient in those aerial symbols. His grandfather had told stories of jinn who appeared in times of great need, supernatural beings who could shift the tide of battle with mere presence. "Hold fire," he whispered in Pashto, the order rippling through his scattered forces like wind across sand. In the riverbed below, Petty Officer First Class Marcus Bulldog Hendricks pressed against the dried clay embankment, his M4 rifle trained on shadows that hadn't moved in minutes. 3 magazines remained in his kit. His team leader, Senior Chief Nathan Reaper Cross, had taken shrapnel in the shoulder 40 minutes ago and was getting pale despite his protests that he was fine. Their extraction helicopter had been turned back twice by heavy ground fire, leaving 12 operators effectively stranded in what had become a very small piece of hell. "Reaper, you seeing this?" Bulldog's voice carried the kind of reverence usually reserved for church or viewing the flag-draped coffins of fallen brothers. Senior Chief Cross adjusted his position, wincing as movement sent fresh waves of pain through his shoulder. His eyes tracked the jet's impossible patterns against the pale morning sky. In 22 years of service, across 3 wars and more classified operations than he could count, Cross had never witnessed anything that made him question the boundary between reality and something larger. But those symbols forming overhead weren't random. They were deliberate, purposeful. And they were having an effect on the enemy forces that surrounded his team. "I'm seeing it, Bull. Question is, what the hell is it?" The F-18 completed another pass, this time carving what looked unmistakably like a trident through the cloudless expanse. The symbol of naval special warfare, the mark that adorned every SEAL's uniform, tattooed on countless forearms, worn with pride and paid for in blood and sweat, and the kind of brotherhood that transcended normal human understanding. "Jesus," whispered Hospital Corpsman Second Class David "Doc" Martinez, the team's medic, as he worked to stabilize Cross's shoulder wound. "Somebody up there knows exactly who we are." The jet's engines shifted pitch, a subtle change that spoke to anyone who understood aircraft. Alina was managing her fuel consumption with surgical precision, extracting every possible minute from her remaining JP-8. Her heads-up display painted critical information across her field of vision. Fuel at 12%, no friendly airfields within range, surface threats actively tracking her position. By every logical calculation, she should have been heading for the nearest safe zone, conserving fuel for her own survival. Instead, she banked left and began another symbol. Major Kozlov had learned to read a battlefield from 30,000 feet before she'd learned to parallel park. The thermal signatures below told a story of desperate men making last stands, of ammunition running low and options running out. She'd been that soldier once, in a different war, on a different continent, when her convoy had been ambushed outside Fallujah and air support was 30 minutes away. She knew what it felt like to count bullets and pray for miracles. The radio transmission that finally broke her concentration came through on the guard frequency, the emergency channel monitored by every aircraft in the region. "Unknown F-18, this is Overlord. Identify yourself immediately. You are flying in restricted airspace over active combat operations." Alina's finger hovered over the transmit button. 3 days of official death had given her an unexpected freedom. No chain of command, no mission parameters, no rules of engagement beyond her own moral compass. She could break radio silence and return to the world of military bureaucracy and after-action reports. Or she could remain a ghost, accountable only to the warriors trapped below and whatever force had guided her to this place at this moment. She chose silence, banking into another impossible maneuver that left a perfect fouled anchor emblazoned across the Afghan sky. Lieutenant Commander Morrison stared at the tactical display, watching the unknown aircraft execute maneuvers that should have been aerodynamically impossible at that altitude and airspeed. His operations officer, a former F-18 pilot himself, stood beside him with the expression of someone witnessing physics being casually rewritten. "Sir, I've run the performance data 3 times, the operations officer said quietly. "That aircraft is flying beyond its design specifications. The G-forces alone should have incapacitated the pilot 15 minutes ago." Morrison nodded, but his attention remained fixed on the radio reports streaming in from multiple observation posts. The Taliban forces that had been maintaining steady pressure on the trapped SEAL team had not only ceased firing, but appeared to be withdrawing from their positions. Thermal imagery showed heat signatures moving away from the contact area, leaving clear avenues for extraction. "It's like they're afraid of it," Morrison muttered, more to himself than anyone else. The operations officer consulted his tablet, scrolling through aircraft databases with increasing frustration. "Sir, that tail number doesn't match anything in our active inventory. According to the registry, that aircraft was destroyed 3 days ago over the Hindu Kush." The implication hung in the air like smoke from distant fires. Morrison had seen enough combat to know that wars occasionally produced events that defied easy explanation. Soldiers spoke in whispers about guardian angels, about impossible rescues and unexplained interventions that saved lives when all hope seemed lost. He'd always filed such stories under battlefield psychology, the human mind's need to impose meaning on chaos. But the tactical display didn't lie. 12 Navy SEALs were about to walk out of what should have been their final firefight, and overhead, a dead pilot was painting salvation across the morning sky in contrails and defiance. "Get me a direct line to the Pentagon," Morrison ordered, "and have our best analysts start pulling everything we can find on that aircraft and its pilot." Alina felt the familiar embrace of G-forces as she pulled through another tight turn, her body pressed deep into the ejection seat by accelerations that should have grayed out her vision. But something sustained her beyond normal human endurance, some reserve of strength that seemed to flow from the sky itself. Her father's voice echoed in her memory, words spoken on the day she'd announced her intention to become a pilot. "When you're up there, Mija, you're not just flying for yourself. You're flying for everyone who needs hope to look up and see that someone still cares." The fuel gauge read 8%. Enough for perhaps 10 more minutes of flight time, certainly not enough to reach friendly territory. The mathematics of survival suggested she should be looking for a place to set down, preferably somewhere the Taliban couldn't reach her before rescue arrived. But mathematics had never been Alina's strongest suit. She'd always been better with faith, with the kind of stubborn belief that had carried her through flight school despite instructors who questioned her commitment, through combat tour where some colleagues still treated her like a curiosity rather than an equal. Her radio crackled to life on a frequency she hadn't expected, the emergency channel reserved for downed pilots. "Valkyrie, this is Guardian Angel. I've got eyes on your position and a full fuel load. Let me know when you need relief." Alina's heart stuttered. Guardian Angel was her wingman's call sign, Lieutenant Tom Maverick Chen, but Maverick was back at Bagram, probably filing paperwork about her presumed death. Unless... "Guardian Angel, confirm your position," she transmitted, her voice steady despite the impossibility of the situation. "2 miles southeast of your position, climbing through 15,000. Valkyrie, where the hell have you been? We've been looking for you for 3 days." Alina banked toward the coordinates, and there it was. Another F-18 Super Hornet, identical to her own, rising through the morning air like a silver prayer answered. But as the aircraft drew closer, details emerged that made her hands tighten on the flight controls. The jet bore no squadron markings, no identifying numbers, no signs of the wear and modification that accumulated on operational aircraft. It was pristine, perfect, as if it had just rolled out of the factory, untouched by war or time or the inevitable entropy that claimed all things. "Guardian Angel, state your fuel status," Alina requested, following protocol even as her mind struggled to process what she was witnessing. "Full tanks, Valkyrie. Full ordnance load. And I've got authorization to provide close air support to those SEALs down there if the situation requires it." The Taliban fighters had begun to move again, but not toward their original positions. Instead, they were forming up in what appeared to be a fighting withdrawal, maintaining discipline despite the supernatural theater playing out above their heads. Their commander, Mullah Gul Hassan, had fought the Soviets in these same mountains decades earlier, and he understood that some battles were won or lost by forces beyond tactics and ammunition. "The Jinn protects the Americans," he told his lieutenant, lowering his AK-47. "We withdraw to the valley. This ground belongs to spirits now." Hassan had lost 3 sons to American airstrikes over the past 5 years, each death carving deeper grooves in a face already weathered by decades of war. He had every reason to hate the aircraft circling overhead, every justification for continuing the fight that had claimed so many of his men. But his grandfather's teachings ran deeper than hatred, older than the grievances that drove modern conflicts. Sometimes the old man had whispered, "The mountains themselves choose sides." Senior Chief Cross watched the enemy withdraw through his scope, hardly believing what his years of combat experience told him was happening. Professional soldiers didn't abandon advantageous positions without cause, especially when they had their enemies pinned and outnumbered. Yet the thermal signatures were unmistakably moving away, creating corridors of opportunity where minutes before there had been only killing fields. "Reaper, we've got movement on the ridge line," reported Petty Officer Second Class Antonio Spider Valdez from his overwatch position. "But they're pulling back, not advancing." Cross keyed his radio, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd led men through situations that existed only in nightmares and classified after-action reports. "All Bravo elements, prepare for extract movement on my command. Doc, how's our casualty status?" Hospital corpsman Martinez finished checking Cross's shoulder bandage, his hands steady despite 3 days of intermittent combat and dangerously little sleep. "You're good to move, Senior Chief. Bleeding's controlled, no signs of infection, but you need proper medical attention within the next few hours." Cross nodded, then activated the long-range radio that would connect him directly to the Tactical Operations Center. "Overlord, this is Bravo 6. Enemy forces are withdrawing from our position. Request immediate extract to grid coordinates I'm transmitting now." The response came back within seconds, tinged with the kind of disbelief that had become common in radio traffic over the past hour. "Bravo 6, we show clear lanes to your extract point. Guardian Angel Flight is providing overwatch. Move when ready." Guardian Angel Flight. Cross had been in service long enough to know that call signs weren't assigned randomly, that pilots earned their names through actions and character traits that became legendary within squadron culture. Whoever was flying overhead had earned a name that suggested divine intervention, and based on what Cross had witnessed, the title seemed appropriate. Alina maintained formation with her mysterious wingman, both aircraft carving lazy circles above the SEAL extraction site. Her fuel gauge now read 6%, well into the range where emergency protocols demanded immediate action to preserve pilot safety. But the SEALs below were still exposed during their movement to the landing zone, still vulnerable to enemy fire from concealed positions. "Guardian Angel, I'm showing critical fuel," she transmitted. "May need to break station soon." "Understood, Valkyrie. Maintain position. Help is closer than you think." The response came with a quality Alina couldn't identify, something that resonated beneath the words themselves. She'd heard similar tones in the voices of pilots who'd been flying combat missions for so long that they'd developed an almost supernatural awareness of their environment. Men and women who seemed to anticipate threats before they materialized. But this was different. This carried the weight of absolute certainty, as if Guardian Angel possessed knowledge that transcended normal intelligence gathering. 2 minutes later, Alina understood why. The helicopter that appeared on the horizon wasn't marked with standard military insignia. Instead, it bore a simple symbol painted in silver against its olive-drab fuselage. Wings spread wide above a fouled anchor, the same image Alina had been drawing across the sky for the past hour. As it approached, she could make out figures in the cargo bay, not dressed in standard flight suits, but in what appeared to be vintage uniforms from different eras of military service. World War II, Korea, Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, as if representatives from every American conflict had gathered to ensure this particular mission succeeded. The lead figure raised his hand in salute, a gesture Alina returned instinctively despite the impossibility of what she was witnessing. The helicopter continued toward the SEAL position, and she realized that whatever forces had brought her to this place were larger than individual heroism or tactical innovation. The SEAL extraction proceeded with textbook precision, each team member reaching the landing zone exactly as rehearsed in countless training exercises. But training had never included supernatural air cover or enemy forces that withdrew as if commanded by powers beyond military understanding. Senior Chief Cross was the last man aboard the helicopter, maintaining his position until every member of his team was accounted for. As the aircraft lifted off, Cross looked up through the cargo bay's open door at the two F-18s still circling overhead. One appeared normal, operational, marked with the wear and modification of active service. The other remained pristine, untouched, flying with a precision that suggested either perfect maintenance or something beyond mechanical explanation. "Doc," he said to the corpsman strapping him into a seat, "you ever see anything like this before?" Martinez followed Cross's gaze upward, watching the aircraft execute maneuvers that belonged in air shows rather than combat zones. "Senior Chief, in 12 years of service, I've seen soldiers survive things that should have killed them, medics perform miracles with nothing but gauze and prayer, and leaders make decisions that saved lives against impossible odds. But this—" he paused, searching for words that could contain what they'd all witnessed. "This feels like something my grandmother would have understood better than military doctrine." The helicopter banked toward the extraction corridor, its rotors beating a rhythm that seemed to synchronize with the circling jets above. Cross activated his radio one final time before leaving the operational area, broadcasting on the frequency he knew the unknown pilots were monitoring. "Guardian Angel Flight, this is Bravo 6. Mission accomplished. 12 souls safely extracted with your assistance. We owe you one." The response came not from the radio, but from the sky itself. Both F-18s rolled into a perfect barrel roll formation, their contrails intertwining like ribbons against the pale morning backdrop. Then, as suddenly as they had appeared, both aircraft banked toward the rising sun and accelerated beyond visual range. Alina's fuel gauge read 2% when she finally made the decision to break formation. Her wingman had vanished as mysteriously as he'd appeared, leaving her alone with critical fuel and no viable landing options within range. The mathematics of survival demanded she find somewhere to set down within the next few minutes, but the terrain below offered little hope. Jagged peaks, narrow valleys, and stretches of ground controlled by forces that wouldn't hesitate to capture or kill a downed American pilot. She keyed her radio to the guard frequency, finally ready to break the silence she'd maintained since beginning her impossible mission. Any station, this is Valkyrie declaring emergency. Critical fuel, no suitable landing area, requesting immediate assistance." The response came from a voice she didn't recognize, transmitted on a frequency that shouldn't have been able to reach her position. "Valkyrie, this is home plate. I have you on radar. Steer course 270, descend to flight level 200. You have a runway waiting." Alina followed the heading, her engines now running on vapor and determination. As she descended through the cloud layer, what emerged below defied every map and intelligence brief she'd ever studied. A perfectly maintained airstrip stretched across what should have been empty mountainside, complete with approach lights, a control tower, and ground crew vehicles positioned as if expecting her arrival. She configured the F-18 for landing, going through emergency procedures she'd practiced hundreds of times but hoped never to use operationally. The touchdown was flawless, her aircraft rolling to a stop exactly where ground crew members directed her with standard marshalling signals. As Alina climbed down from the cockpit, she found herself facing a reception committee unlike anything in standard military protocol. The figures waiting for her wore uniforms from different services and different eras, but all bore the same expression: quiet respect mixed with something approaching reverence. The man who stepped forward first wore the insignia of a World War II Army Air Forces colonel, his uniform bearing ribbons for campaigns Alina had only read about in history books. Despite the obvious anachronism, he moved with the crisp bearing of an active-duty officer. "Major Kozlov," he said, extending his hand. "Colonel James Fortress Morrison, 8th Air Force. On behalf of every pilot who ever pushed past empty tanks to bring their people home, welcome to Valhalla Station." Alina shook the offered hand, nodding that it felt completely solid, warm with circulation and rough with the calluses that came from years of handling aircraft controls. "Sir, I'm not sure I understand what's happening here." Colonel Morrison smiled, the expression carrying decades of understanding accumulated through combat missions over Europe, Pacific atolls, and skis, where young men learned the difference between courage and survival. "Major, you've been flying for people who needed hope more than they needed regulation adherence. That kind of mission tends to attract support from quarters that don't appear on organizational charts." Behind Morrison, Alina could see aircraft that spanned the history of military aviation. P-51 Mustangs parked beside F-4 Phantoms, A-10 Warthogs next to aircraft she couldn't identify, but which seemed to shimmer slightly, as if not entirely present in normal reality. Ground crews moved among them with the easy competence of professionals who'd been maintaining flying machines since the Wright brothers first proved that humans could claim the sky. "Sir, my squadron thinks I'm dead," Alina said, the reality of her situation finally settling into conscious thought. "I've been listed as KIA for 3 days." "And technically that's accurate," replied a new voice. Alina turned to see a woman approaching, wearing the flight suit and insignia of a modern Air Force major but moving with the same indefinable quality that marked all the figures at this impossible base. "Major Sarah Phoenix Williams, 355th Fighter Squadron. I went down over Iraq in 2004. Officially." Phoenix extended her hand, and Alina noticed the same solidity, the same unmistakable reality despite the obvious impossibility of the entire situation. "The thing about being officially dead, Alina, is that it frees you from a lot of operational constraints. No mission parameters except the ones that matter. No rules of engagement beyond protecting people who can't protect themselves." Alina looked around at the bustling activity of the base, trying to process what she was witnessing. "So this is, what? Some kind of afterlife for military pilots?" Colonel Morrison laughed, a sound that carried genuine warmth despite the surreal circumstances. "Nothing that dramatic, Major. Think of it as a posting for people who aren't quite finished with their service obligations. The sky has always belonged to those brave enough to claim it, and sometimes it calls in favors from pilots who understand the difference between following orders and doing what's right." A new voice joined the conversation, belonging to a man whose Navy uniform bore the Dolphins insignia of a submarine service, despite his presence at an air base. "Master Chief Robert Deep Six Harrison, USS Thresher. Lost in 1963, but still reporting for duty when sailors need someone to watch their backs." Alina's training had prepared her for enemy contact, mechanical failure, and even capture behind hostile lines. But no flight school curriculum had covered supernatural reassignment to bases that existed outside normal reality. "Master Chief, with respect, I'm having some difficulty accepting what I'm experiencing here." Harrison nodded understanding. "Major, I spent 40 years underwater before I accepted that some service commitments transcend the normal boundaries of life and death. The Navy doesn't just train you to fight, it trains you to be part of something larger than individual existence. Same principle applies here, just with a broader operational definition of active duty." The sound of approaching aircraft interrupted their conversation. Alina looked up to see a formation of helicopters approaching the airfield, their rotors beating in perfect synchronization. As they landed, she recognized the types: Vietnam-era Hueys, Gulf War Blackhawks, and modern variants that bore no standard military markings. From the lead helicopter emerged figures in Army uniforms spanning decades of service, each bearing the subdued insignia and bearing of Special Operations personnel. They moved with the controlled purpose of soldiers who'd spent their careers in situations where failure meant not just mission loss, but the death of people who depended on their success. The man who approached Alina wore the uniform of a Vietnam-era Green Beret, his bearing suggesting years of operations in terrain where conventional forces feared to venture. Major Kozlov, Captain Michael Ghostwriter Torres, 5th Special Forces Group. My team went missing in Laos in 1971. Officially, we were never there. Unofficially, we've been providing support for operations that need someone who doesn't exist on paper. Alina felt the pieces of understanding beginning to coalesce, even though the full picture remained beyond normal comprehension. Captain, are you telling me that I've been recruited into some kind of supernatural military unit? Torres smiled, the expression carrying the hard-earned wisdom of someone who'd learned to find humor in situations that would break most people's sanity. Major, I'm telling you that service to something larger than yourself doesn't end just because bureaucrats file paperwork declaring you dead. The mission continues, just with different operational parameters. Colonel Morrison stepped forward, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to briefing pilots for missions that would determine the course of history. Major Kozlov, what you demonstrated today over that SEAL position, the willingness to risk everything for fellow service members, the innovation under impossible circumstances, the commitment to mission success regardless of personal cost, those are the qualities that bring pilots to our attention. He gestured toward the aircraft parked around the base, each one maintained in perfect condition despite representing decades of military aviation history. Every pilot here faced a moment when they had to choose between following regulations and doing what was right, between personal survival and mission success, between the easy path and the path that honor demanded. Alina looked at the faces surrounding her, recognizing in each the same expression she'd seen in mirrors after particularly difficult missions, the quiet satisfaction of people who'd pushed beyond normal human limitations to accomplish something that mattered. And if I accept this posting, what exactly would my duties involve? Phoenix stepped forward, her voice carrying the experience of someone who'd spent years providing close air support for ground forces in situations that existed only in classified reports. Alina, you continue doing exactly what you did today. When service members find themselves in situations where conventional support isn't sufficient, when they need someone who can operate outside normal constraints, you provide that support. The rules are simple, added Captain Torres. Protect those who can't protect themselves. Support missions that serve the greater good, regardless of political considerations. And remember that honor is more important than survival. Master Chief Harrison nodded agreement. Major, the sea taught me that some things are worth more than individual life. The sky will teach you the same lesson, just from a different perspective. Alina felt the weight of decision settling around her like a flight suit designed for missions that transcended normal reality. Her fuel tanks were empty, her squadron believed her dead, and the mathematical probability of returning to her previous life approached zero. But the faces around her carried the same dedication she'd seen in every unit she'd served with, the same commitment to something larger than personal ambition or survival. Colonel Morrison, she said finally, what's my first assignment? The base commander smiled, an expression that seemed to light the entire airfield despite the early morning hour. Major, there's a Marine Force recon team pinned down in the Korangal Valley. They've been requesting air support for 6 hours, but the weather has every conventional aircraft grounded. The mission is considered impossible. Alina felt a familiar stirring in her chest, the same sensation that had driven her to push beyond fuel limitations and operational constraints to help the SEALs. Sir, when do I launch? "Your aircraft is being prepped now," Morrison replied, pointing toward a hangar where ground crew members were servicing an F-18 that appeared identical to the one she just landed, but which somehow radiated an aura of unlimited capability. "This one has a few modifications that aren't available through standard procurement channels. Enhanced fuel capacity, improved avionics and weapons systems that adapt to whatever the mission requires." Phoenix walked beside Alina as they approached the hangar, her voice carrying the camaraderie of someone who understood the unique challenges of female pilots in combat aviation. "Alina, the aircraft responds to intent as much as control input. When you're up there, don't just think about flying. Think about what you need to accomplish, and it will help you find a way." The F-18 waiting in the hangar was indeed identical to standard Navy aircraft, with one crucial difference. It seemed to pulse with subtle energy, as if the metal itself were alive with purpose. Ground crew members moved around it with the reverence usually reserved for religious artifacts, each action performed with precision that bordered on ritual. Chief Petty Officer Maria Wrench Santos emerged from beneath the aircraft, wiping her hands on a cloth that somehow remained perfectly clean despite obvious mechanical work. "Major, your bird is ready. Full fuel, full ordnance and systems that will perform beyond manufacturer specifications. She'll take you where you need to go and bring you home safe." Alina climbed into the cockpit, nodding that the controls felt familiar yet somehow enhanced, as if designed specifically for her hands. The heads-up display came online immediately, painting information across her field of vision with clarity that exceeded any system she'd previously operated. "Valkyrie, this is Tower," came Morrison's voice over the radio. "You are cleared for takeoff. Your call sign has been updated in our system. From now on, you're Guardian Angel 2. Alina taxied toward the runway, feeling the aircraft respond to her inputs with precision that seemed almost telepathic. As she reached takeoff position, she keyed the radio one final time before beginning her new career in impossible missions. "Tower, Guardian Angel 2 ready for departure. Thanks for the opportunity to keep serving." "Guardian Angel 2, you are cleared for takeoff. Bring our Marines home." The F-18 accelerated down the runway with power that seemed to draw from sources beyond jet fuel and mechanical engineering. As Alina rotated and climbed toward the mountains where Marines were waiting for salvation, she understood that her real service was just beginning. Behind her, Valhalla Station faded into morning mist, invisible to normal observation, but solid as granite for those who needed to find it. In the Koringal Valley, Gunnery Sergeant Patricia Iron Delacroix pressed her back against the rocky outcropping that had been her squad's shelter for the past 8 hours. 12 Marines under her command, ammunition running low, and Taliban forces maintaining steady pressure from 3 directions. The weather had grounded conventional air support, leaving force recon isolated in terrain that offered few advantages to defenders. "Gunny, we've got movement on the ridge line," reported Corporal James Spider Kim from his observation post. "Looks like they're setting up for another assault." Delacroix keyed her radio, knowing that her transmission would likely yield the same response she'd received for the past 6 hours. "Overlord, this is Recon 6. Still need immediate air support at grid coordinates previously transmitted. Enemy forces massing for assault." The response crackled through static generated by the storm system that had grounded every aircraft in the region. "Recon 6, negative on air support. Weather is still below minimums for flight operations. Extraction will commence when conditions improve." But conditions weren't improving. The storm that had rolled through the valley showed no signs of clearing, and Delacroix's tactical experience suggested that the Taliban forces surrounding her position were simply waiting for darkness before launching their final assault. 12 Marines against an estimated 60 hostiles, with limited ammunition and no avenue for withdrawal. "Corporal Kim, what's your count on enemy positions?" she called to her forward observer. Gunny, I've got visual confirmation on at least 4 machine gun positions, plus multiple small unit positions in the tree line. They've got us triangulated pretty good. Delacroix had been a Marine for 16 years, serving in every major conflict since Iraq, and she'd never found herself in a tactical situation with fewer favorable options. But Marines were trained to create solutions when none existed, to find ways to accomplish the mission regardless of circumstances. The sound that cut through the valley wasn't initially recognizable as aircraft engines. The storm system should have made flight operations impossible, yet something was approaching from the south, flying low enough that its passage disturbed the cloud cover. "Gunny, you hearing that?" asked Private First Class Maria Santos from her position 20 meters away. Before Delacroix could respond, the radio crackled to life on a frequency reserved for close air support coordination. "Recon 6, this is Guardian Angel 2. I'm on station and ready to provide support. Can you mark your position?" Delacroix stared at her radio, hardly believing that any pilot would attempt flight operations in current weather conditions. But tactical situations rarely allowed time for questioning good fortune. "Guardian Angel 2, this is Recon 6, marking position with infrared strobe, north side of valley floor." "Copy that, Recon 6. I have your position. Can you identify priority targets for engagement?" Through the storm clouds, Delacroix could barely make out the silhouette of an aircraft that seemed to move through the weather, as if atmospheric conditions were merely suggestions rather than operational limitations. The F-18 banked around the valley with precision that should have been impossible given visibility conditions. "Guardian Angel 2, priority targets are machine gun positions on ridge line, approximately 300 meters northwest of our position. Secondary targets are small unit positions in tree line to our east." "Understood, Recon 6. Keep your heads down." What happened next would be discussed in Marine Corps aviation circles for decades. The F-18 descended through cloud cover that should have prevented visual target acquisition, yet delivered precision strikes that eliminated hostile positions with surgical accuracy. Each weapon release was followed immediately by secondary explosions as ammunition caches and equipment stockpiles were destroyed. But most remarkable was the pilot's ability to distinguish between friendly and hostile forces in conditions where visual identification should have been impossible. Every strike landed exactly where Taliban fighters had positioned themselves, while leaving areas occupied by Marines completely untouched. "Recon 6, this is Guardian Angel 2. Immediate threats neutralized. I'm going to make another pass to ensure the area is clear for your extraction." Delacroix watched the aircraft execute another impossible maneuver, flying through cloud cover as if guided by instruments that operated beyond normal sensor limitations. "Guardian Angel 2, how are you managing target identification in these conditions?" The response carried a quality that Delacroix couldn't identify, something that suggested knowledge derived from sources beyond standard military intelligence. "Recon 6, sometimes you have to trust that the right people are in the right place at the right time. Your extraction helicopter should be inbound within 10 minutes." As if summoned by the pilot's words, the distinctive sound of rotors began echoing through the valley. A CH-53 Super Stallion emerged from the storm, flying with the same impossible precision demonstrated by the F-18. Both aircraft operated as if weather conditions were merely background noise rather than flight-prohibiting obstacles. The helicopter extraction proceeded flawlessly, each Marine reaching the aircraft exactly as trained despite conditions that should have made precision flying impossible. As Gunnery Sergeant Delacroix was the last Marine aboard, she looked up through the cargo bay doors at the F-18 still circling overhead. "Guardian,